Baxter, through till 12 today at BBC Radio Gloucestershire, talking about science this morning because it is the Science Festival, the 10th Science Festival at Cheltenham, which is underway. It started yesterday, and people interested in science in the studio today for our panel discussion. Now, you mentioned, Maggie, yourself that, you made the decision to go into a sort of career in a scientific area or engineering. Yeah. Why do you think it's so difficult to encourage women to take up a career in science?
I think some of it is to do with their boyfriends, to be honest. I tried to put 3 girls through college, and each time they had problems with their boyfriends, and they didn't like the girls working with men, which is ridiculous. Nowadays, I think there's probably a different attitude, but we've got to do something. I mean, what worries me is if you look around in a lot of the jobs where people are repairing things, a lot of the people are 60 plus, and there's going to be a massive gap. If you want something repaired, you're going to have a job to find somebody repaired. They've only just started the apprenticeships, and there's going to be this awful gap coming along where it's going to cost you a fortune. And the other problem is that there's not a lot of money in it. If you go to a lawyer or you go to a doctor, you're going to pay £120 an hour, something in that region. Would you pay that to have your lawnmower repaired, or would you pay that to have your washing machine repaired? And that's where the problem is, because to repair things, you cannot pay the sort of wages that people want these days. And the kids, they want to play with computers. They don't want to get their hands dirty. I mean, I love to get up to my neck in oil. I have a great time. But there's not many that would. But I think if we've got to look for somebody to replace this hole. And there are lots of women with wonderful capabilities. They do great things in the house. So a lot of them drill holes in the wall and do all sorts of things. So there's no reason. They just need a little bit of encouragement, especially if they've got the kind of mind like I have that's always wanting to know what makes things work. And I like to know what's behind things. And if they've got that kind of mind, then we should encourage them.
Because you'd like to think that nowadays there is every opportunity for young women to get involved in science. And I remember my mother saying her father was a vet and she wanted to go into that area herself, but it was discouraged in those days. She wasn't allowed to go and study that. Her father wouldn't let her in those days, and would love to have done that. And I think this is interesting because female students still tend to generally outperform their male counterparts at GCSE, but the numbers are going on to study scientific subjects at university and beyond are relatively low. Katie Grandin from the L'Oreal UNESCO for Women in Science programme, which is helping to run an event today at Cheltenham, says girls need more scientific role models.
People like Professor Brian Cox has done an amazing amount to sort of put science, make it more popular this year. Obviously, he's a male role model, and there is a lack of female role models in the media for girls to aspire to. I also think there is a preconception that science is a particularly demanding career and difficult to juggle with family commitments.
My wife's actually a science teacher, and she's always found it a bit depressing to find how many girls go on to do A-level science subjects. She teaches biology herself. Vivian, do you have a daughter yourself? Or?
I have 2 daughters, and one is now a student nurse, and the other is in sales. Neither of them, unfortunately, are engineers or scientists. But I think Maggie makes a very good point that we have got, regardless of gender even, we've got a great big gap coming along. The lack of apprenticeships for literally the last 20, 25 years is leaving a huge gap. And, with females and males, we're just not going to have practical hands-on engineers. We may have academics, but no one to actually do the repairs, and that's a very valid point.
So with one daughter who's in nursing, that's a sort of career that's got a scientific edge to it. Did you have these discussions with your daughters when they were younger about what area they wanted to go into? Did you discourage them from going into certain areas? Or?
You sort of try to guide them as best you can without coercing them and pushing them and squeezing them into the wrong direction. The interesting thing is, with my youngest daughter, Stephanie, who's now a student nurse, the level of science required to be a nurse is unbelievable. Some of the textbooks that I've looked through with her, I was absolutely lost. It was way beyond my capability to look at that and understand what on earth she was studying. And I was actually quite surprised, to be quite honest. You sort of look at a nursing role as a caring, compassionate role, and you forget about the science side of it. And it is very, very scientific. I was very surprised.
Russell Foster, you heard Katie Grandin say that it was a lack of female role models. Do you think that's part of the problem?
It could well be. I think scientists at our level tend to be gender blind, genuinely. I mean, you look at the CVs and you almost don't look at the names. It's what they've done. And then during the interview, it's the passion they exhibit for their subject, and it's their achievements. And we really don't look at gender in terms of career trajectory. Lack of role models, well, there aren't that many really senior women in my area of science. Dame Kay Davis at Oxford is a superb role model, and she does a great deal. But she's, I'm afraid, in the minority. I think that the really difficult issue is that, of course, we heard it from the speaker, getting the demands of a scientific career also with the demands of a family, and that is a genuine problem. And that's where we could, I think, make some sort of, I don't know, we've got to try and sort something out. The Royal Society has ways in which you can sort of some funding schemes whereby you can get back after a sort of a family break, and perhaps we should be doing more of that.
I mean, some would argue it's not just encouraging women into science, but young people in general into science, and that perhaps there is a hole in that sort of part of education. I mean, my wife would say that there is not enough investment in science at her school.
Yes, I think that's also very interesting. I think that the various levels of education tend to be a bit siloed. So, for example, you know, a place like Oxford, until relatively recently, hasn't had that much contact with the sixth forms and indeed the lower schools. And many of us sort of are very keen to get out there. And I did some work with the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, combining science and music teaching, and going to East End London schools and some schools in Norfolk and Suffolk. And these children were 8, 9, 10 years of age, and this was fantastic. And I think that the fact that people had gone from a university and were talking made the whole thing much more tangible. So I'd like to see the boundaries much more blurred.
If you're listening to this and you want to comment on other things we talked about, 01452 307575, you can text the word GLOSS and your message to 81333. It's 5 to 11.